It is over.
Hey guys, welcome to another Insiders interview, and tonight we have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Gary Horne. Gary of the this is the NWA Podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit of NWA tonight on NWA Tuesday. So, hey Gary, thank you so much for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Oh my God, I am super excited. This is it. This is the big time. Like, I feel like I have made it now. Everything I've worked for has led to this.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
I am in the Wrestling Daze community.
I am very flattered by that. I'm sure Jeff is too.
Absolutely.
Oh man, awesome. Well, hey, I guess we'll get started by maybe going back to the beginnings a little bit. So, what got you into, before we even get to the NWA? I mean, what got you into wrestling, man?
Oh God. So I would say my very first memory, I'm not even kidding that this is legitimately like one of the very first things that I remember at all, is I remember walking by a television, and I would have been, so people think I'm crazy, I would have been super young at this time, but I saw the Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant thing where Andre ripped the cross off of Hogan's neck.
Yes.
And he cut his chest and had that whole Roddy Piper's like, "You're bleeding, man." And for some reason, like, that is ingrained in my brain. And just how big they all looked compared to like Bobby Heenan, and then the blood across his chest where it was just like, these are monsters. And then one just cut the other one. And it's, I don't know, that's my first wrestling memory, but I remember that was, I was hooked exactly then. I never loved anything as much as I loved wrestling right at that moment.
That's awesome, man. It's funny you mention that, because we were just talking about, like, somebody in our community was asking us what we thought were the most iconic moments in wrestling, and actually that was mine. From the Piper's Pit to WrestleMania 3, all throughout that, because again, I grew up with Andre and him being always the good guy, and then all of a sudden when he turned heel, oh my goodness, that was an amazing moment. And yeah, I totally agree with you there. That was an unbelievable moment.
I don't, like, I didn't see WrestleMania 3 right when it happened. I know that. And, but I was so enthralled with the buildup. And then, like, the next thing I actually remember is that I remember, like, my dad getting to tell me that Hulk Hogan won. But then they were watching the main event, and it was funny. Like, I just was doing some research that this came up, again for me. So I was reading all about it, but it was the main event where, they were on NBC, and it was the Hogan versus Andre match where the two Hebners showed up.
Yes.
And screwed Hogan out of the belt. And God, I got to relive all of that. Like, I remember I was supposed to be in bed and waking up and walking into the room and seeing the two Hebners, and my uncle and my dad being like, "What the hell's going on here?" And to me, in my mind at the time, I was just like, how are they doing this? How is this even possible? There's two of the same guy. And anyway, but yeah, that whole saga, I was young at the time, but that's definitely what got me in.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, just unbelievable moment. And yeah, I gotta love the evil referees. We were talking about that a little bit ago too. It's like, where has that stuff gone? I mean, that was fun stuff, when you had the valets and you had the evil referees and stuff like that. They kind of got away from that. And yeah, I kind of miss that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's weird, man. It's like, if you want to, I battle with it sometimes, because I get the idea that you want everything to be on the up and up, or you want to believe everything, suspend disbelief and it be real the whole way through. So, like, if you've heard, like, any of the NWA podcast stuff, we battle this with, like, the question mark, for instance. Like, some days I'm for him and some days I'm against him. And but Yeah, there is something about that, like little storylines like that. I was super into. I guess it's just when you're an adult, like your visions of things change, and you got to let yourself go back. Maybe it's just like with Star Wars movies or something. But because I remember loving Ultimate Warrior and loving Papa Shango cursing him for black ooze to fall down his face and being freaked out by that. And like, I don't know. So like now I feel like if I saw something like that, I'd be like, oh, what the hell? But if I put myself back in my shoes then, I think, I don't know, I did enjoy that kind of stuff.
So what was your was WWE always your big one, or did you watch other companies and stuff back then too?
It's weird because at this time I would have been growing up in Georgia, and so you would think that NWA would have been my main thing, but for some reason, just where I lived, it was very rural, and like we literally, when I was growing up, I had an antenna like on the house. You know, that's how we picked up television.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was WWF was what we could get most of the time. Every once in a while, some Saturday 605 stuff would come on, and I could catch it and stuff like that. But I knew about all those guys, but it was through wrestling magazines. Yeah. And I was literally just talking to I had Dave LaGreca on, and we were just talking about this, that, you know, that's even gone the way of the Buffalo for the most part. But I saw guys like Jerry the King Lawler in there with all these championship belts, and I knew who Ric Flair was because he was supposedly the greatest champion of all time. You know, it was between him and Hogan, and just seeing all these different people. But it was mostly just reading about them and wondering. And NWA always seemed like this, I don't want to use a poor term to like reference Cornette or something, but an outlaw promotion. I mean, obviously that is not what he'd consider an outlaw promotion, but it was, it just seemed like this weird offshoot of wrestling that was kind of the Wild West, sort of, you know, where like my WWF was like this clean, polished, the pros, you know, like the legit stuff. But yeah, WWF to answer the question, really. Gotcha.
No, I mean, it's something, it's a question. It's, you know, really for me too. I mean, I really never saw, because of where I am, similarly to you, I only really saw a lot of WWF programming, even back when I was watching it on Saturday morning TV, because we just didn't get a lot of different promotions up here, especially on basic cable. You know, sometimes you'd get some stuff out of, I don't know, you'd get some things that would go out of New York by the way of other places. And every now and then I'd get to see a show other than regular WWF programming, but even live events. I think Jeff and I had Nikita Koloff on, and we were chatting with him. And I said to him, I remembered seeing him live at some point, and I thought it was in Philadelphia. I figured it was in Philadelphia because that was the places where I'd go to see the shows. And he had said that they were always in the Civic Center. I had kind of assumed it was in the Spectrum back then, but it must have been the Civic Center that we went to a show to. So, I mean, they were so close in where they would have live events, and yet, like you had mentioned, you know, you just never got word of the NWA depending on what region you were in.
Yeah, my first live show that I saw, though, I will say, was a WCW show. Like, they were the only ones that came through town, and I remember, but I think this was this would have been the 90s, though. I mean, this was like Kevin Nash was Vinny Vegas, and it had like Cactus Jack on it and stuff like that. So Paul Orndorff was there, and Vader and people like that. But that was a cool show. So, I mean, I got to see them there. They were starting to show up a little bit more on TV. But, yeah, it was WWF. I mean, I was born, I guess, in the era that Vince had kind of already started taking over everything. So if I was going to see wrestling, it was going to be those guys. So everything else just kind of seemed gritty and weird compared to WWF. Who knew that later on that would be what I actually liked more? But here we are.
Well, the choices have come back now, which is kind of nice. You jump forward and all these years, after you had obviously you had the 90s and you had WWF and WWE slash going against WCW. And, that was a big thing back then as well. But yeah, I mean, at least now, and I know Jeff and I talk about this a lot too. I mean, at least now there's choices, which is nice. I mean, because if you get turned off by something, you don't have to necessarily feel like you have to watch that as much as you may have used to watch it. I mean, I know I got so turned off of WWE, I stopped watching it for a while. And it was just like, I just couldn't take the way that, the way that Vince made some decisions there and just kind of overlooks the fans and what they want. I don't know. And it could be my opinion, But yeah, I mean, it's nice to see though now that we're getting more choices, and it's awesome to see that these things are coming back.
I don't think you're alone, man. I literally I've talked about this on our on the This is the NWA show a lot. I try, man. I try to stay positive. I try to have a good attitude about wrestling and everything else in general. But yeah, WWE, sorry, finally got to a point with me that they drove me away. Actually, for the first time in my whole life, I stopped watching them. It was right after WrestleMania last year, not this last one, but I guess what was that, 35? I don't know, like Becky Lynch's whole storyline had hooked me like no other storyline had for a long time.
Yeah.
And then I felt like they botched it completely. Like they just screwed it up, throwing Charlotte, and that's not to, kick dirt at Charlotte or whatever, but it's just like, I felt like it was Ronda and Becky, and that's what it should have been. And then watching that WrestleMania, and me and some of my friends usually have like a huge party. We invited a bunch of people that don't normally watch wrestling, and that thing felt like it went on for like 10 hours and till it finally even got to the Becky Lynch match. And then I was just kind of disappointed by the match. And it was somewhere around there and the Saudi Arabia stuff where I was just like, well, here's even more of an excuse. I'm just done. And I canceled the network, which I had since day one, which is something I thought I'd never, ever do. And I got rid of all of it. I actually didn't get the network back until this WrestleMania, actually, just because we were in quarantine. I was like, well, hell, what else am I going to do? I'm going to watch WrestleMania. So,
yeah, man, I agree with you. And I know Jeff and I had talked about this too. And Jeff, I know you can speak from that a little bit too, because I think you and I, we left around the same time as well. For me, it was attached to Bray Wyatt because I just loved the character. And when they got rid of him and he went away for, I guess it was better part of a year, I was like, you know what? I enjoyed the character so much and the storylines they were telling. And I'm like, and then all of a sudden he's just gone, and I didn't know what happened to him. You read about it now and you see that, well, he took a hiatus and left because he wanted to redevelop his character, but who knows whether they made him do it or they suggested that he do it. But when that happened, I'm like, you know what? I just didn't have anything else that interested me to watch. And I, like you, I was like, yeah, I canceled the network. I'm like, excuse me, I'm not going to keep paying for this if I'm not going to be watching it anyway. And a lot of the old content is great, but I've seen a lot of it. So I'm like, yeah, I just didn't see. Jeff, I know you had a similar story there too.
Yeah. I think I got out of it around 2017 because I just felt like things were just stale. And I had the network for a while, from day one, like you, Gary, and then I just canceled it because I just got bored with what they were putting out there, and I just didn't really see any real alternatives at that point, and it was a different time in my life, so I just said, you know what, I'm just gonna step away from this, and hopefully it gets better one day, and here we are again. So,
yeah, it's crazy. But that's like I said, I'm glad that there are choices out there now. So, Gary, how did you start up with the NWA?
So that started because Well, I mean, I think like Jeff was just talking about, I mean, I was just kind of stepping away anywhere, sort of starting to go back. I mean, you mentioned the Bray Wyatt stuff. I think that was one of the many straws that fell before one finally broke the camel's back. But because I loved Bray Wyatt too, by the way, and I saw him in the when he was doing his stuff in NXT and just. And I saw stuff like, what was it, like Florida Championship Wrestling? Wasn't he down there?
Yeah.
He was wearing a hockey mask down there, or something that looked very similar to it, I think.
Yeah, and I always liked that guy. And he was doing some really creative stuff, and it felt like he sorry, I know you asked a question. Here I am rambling. But
no, you're good.
It just felt like it was like one of those things where like he like landed with the he's got the whole world in his hands thing, which was cool. But it was like, it felt like whoever was writing, like, realized that was cool, but that's all they knew. And they just wanted to keep doing that over and over again. And then they, till they broke it down and wore him out and then got rid of him or whatever it is they do. And so I get it with Bray Wyatt. But yeah, I was looking around for something, and then I saw Billy Corgan bought the NWA. And I'm sure it's a similar story to a lot of people, but I actually grew up as a Smashing Pumpkins fan. Legitimately, they were one of my favorite bands in high school and stuff. I loved the Smashing Pumpkins. So I'd always heard Billy Corgan was a wrestling fan. And so that was always just kind of a neat like bonus. But then when I saw like Billy Corgan bought the NWA, I was like, oh, what is this? This is an interesting place to go. Like, okay, now you got the oldest, company known to wrestling or whatever you want to call it, the oldest brand. And now Billy Corgan's buying it. So it was like a lot of things came together, and I was like, well, I'm in, I'm going to watch this, whatever this is. And then it was around that time too, I started deciding, like, I was like, man, it's the perfect time to jump in and be involved with something. And if I've ever wanted to talk about wrestling, now's generally a good time, is when something's just starting out. So that's where it happened.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know Daze talks a lot about this too. I heard the same story about Billy Corgan as well. I never really looked into it after that because I wasn't sure. I'm not really because I was disinterested, but I really wasn't sure what it was going to be. I didn't know whether it was going to be on television in some way. I didn't know, didn't really know the logistics about it. And I guess I just kind of lost track. And then from, when I was on the Daze streams, he would talk about it a lot. And I'm like, okay. And then I remember one night, on a Tuesday, I watched it on YouTube, and I ended up watching. I watched the show where it wasn't even an actual show. It was the Thunder Rosa MMA thing, and that was kind of my introduction to it. And I remember watching that, but that kind of fascinated me, and I'm like, okay, and and there we go. I just started watching the show ever since then. And I've loved it so far. And like you, it's a new starting point. It's a great point to jump in and see something from the beginning. And I know Daze mentions that too, to get on something from the start is kind of cool, because none of us can say that. I mean, we weren't with, obviously WWF, WWE was around, years before, I had started watching wrestling, and some of the other promotions have been around forever as well. So, but yeah, I totally get that. And that was, must have been exciting to get on board with it right from the start. Have you been with them since day one? I mean, have you been watching since day one, since all of the 10 pounds of gold stuff and all that as well?
Yeah, I have. I was on board the second that they put out something, they were going to do something on YouTube. I was watching it. Fell in love with Tim Storm like immediately. As we're recording this, today they aired a lot of the stuff that was like kind of a compilation of the Nick Aldis, Tim Storm story from back at the beginning, and I've seen that stuff multiple times. When I finally started the podcast, I was recording recap episodes. Like I would put together playlists on the YouTube channel of the 10 Pounds of Gold series and any stuff in between that I thought people should see. And then I would try to bring in new people on each episode just for the podcast to like interview them, to like make them watch like a playlist and let's talk about some of the episodes. It was tougher then because there wasn't episodes like there are now, like NWA Powerr episodes to actually review. It was just, you know, these random, here's a 20-minute video, here's a 10-minute video. You know, it was kind of tough to get people. It's a thing that I think helped them get some fandom, but they realized they had to get like a regular television show going.
Yeah, I agree. Jeff, I'm sure you've got some questions, man. I don't want to hog up the whole thing here.
No, I ramble a lot, Jeff. So if I talk too much, you guys.
Oh, no, listen, man. It's all good. It's all good. What I want to ask is, whenever you meet someone who says, well, I haven't watched the NWA, or if you run into other wrestling fans that watch, you know, primarily WWE or AEW or Impact, what do you tell them about the NWA? What sets it apart in your mind that you feel like other wrestling fans that don't necessarily watch it already would be interested in watching it?
I think a lot of it, man, is that the NWA is just the bare bones of what makes wrestling good. And I almost feel like it's like a derogatory thing to say about it. And I don't mean it that way, but it's just like, it's simple. It's just an easy show to watch. And so I think it has a good chance with people that aren't watching a lot of wrestling. Listen, I mean, you guys probably know this too. I mean, if you're talking to somebody who's like a lifelong WWE fan or somebody who's still caught up in it, and especially it's hard for some of us, like we are, I guess people would call us smart marks or whatever. It's unless you're even on that side of it, people that are just loyal to WWE are loyal to WWE. And AEW's got some hardcores right now too, because they are just invested in that company succeeding, which makes perfect sense. But so it's hard to convince people that are hung up in that stuff otherwise, except that I say, hey, look, man, it's like a 50-minute show once a week. It's easy to watch. If you're going to give yourself 15 hours of WWE a week, you know, like there's just set aside 50 minutes for NWA, and I promise it'll hook you. And especially for new people, I feel like it's perfect for new people because they can jump in. I mean, we're only 20 episodes in of NWA Powerr, and I don't even bother with like telling people about all the other stuff past that. I'm like, yeah, you can just start at episode 1 of NWA Powerr and you get everything you need. Pretty much every episode, they do an amazing job of you knowing who these people are and what they're about. And I love that about it. And it's like I said, it goes back to the simple formula of just, you know, you can tell pretty much immediately who you like and who you don't like. The crowd's going to help you along either way. There's no like ifs, ands, or buts about it. I don't think, like, you know, generally there's maybe some people that walk the line, but it's got this old school feel. It's just easy to get into, I think.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I mean, I grew up on studio wrestling and the NWA, especially being here in the Carolinas and this area. And, you know, a lot of those old school guys, they would go and not, you know, they toured gyms. They'd go to high school gyms and wrestle and do shows. And, you know, some of the younger wrestling fans don't really believe that. But I mean, I've seen like high quality matches with big names in high school gyms in my area. And, you know, being, you know, in a close vicinity to Greensboro and Charlotte and all that, I got to see a lot of good wrestling. So when I first got back into the NWA, that's the one thing I really appreciated about it, because it reminds you of the old school wrestling. And, you know, there's not the goofy stuff. There's no, you know, I mean, you don't have to worry about pyro and all that. It's just wrestlers, promos, managers, valet, you know, that kind of thing. And it's great. And that's what I love about it. for sure.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you grew up an NWA fan, because I didn't, and you know what you were saying is when you go to the shows, like I've been to every Powerr taping now, and I was at Crockett Cup, and there are so many people there that grew up on NWA, so they will tell you everything about the past, everything about the NWA from like the early 80s, the 70s, Harley Race, and all of these guys. And it's interesting that they love that stuff. Powerr was weird to me to start off with because no entrance music. It was just kind of a weird setup, a studio setup. I mean, I'd seen, you know, clips and stuff, but I'd never lived it. And there are, but there's a lot of people that are in that crowd that are like, this is wrestling. This is what I remember. This is everything I wanted. This is what it's supposed to be. And so it's interesting. So I guess that's how it was for you.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up, you know, watching the NWA, watching, you know, Steamboat and Flair and Sting and Flair and Harley Race and Flair. I mean, that's what I grew up on. So seeing something like this with the NWA just really, it brings back all the nostalgia of watching wrestling in the 80s and seeing the NWA at its peak at that point. So it really is refreshing to see that, and you know, it kind of takes me back to my childhood. And I love the fact that they actually take the time to develop their characters and storyline, and you know, you really get a good sense of the wrestler because you know that type of setup really lends itself well to allowing the wrestler to kind of shine through, and you're not stuck behind all of the production that you get from a WWE or an AEW. You get, you know, real stuff, which I really love.
I think one of the things about it right now is that I think that Billy and Lagana are taking a gamble on one aspect of wrestling that they felt like that nobody else was gambling on yet, and that's the personalities. Like I get that other wrestling companies obviously know you've got to have characters and whatnot, but it's like WWE has always been the show, the presentation, right, like the bright lights and flashy colors and everything else. And AEW's leaning into, it feels like these are some of the best wrestlers you're ever going to see on the planet. Like, you know, if it's your kind of thing or whatever. I know obviously that's a controversial thing to say on the internet, but these guys are really athletic and really talented, and you know, we're going to have the best. But then I feel like the NWA's over there with filling a niche that maybe Ring of Honor tried for a while, but they kind of faded away and did something else. And but NWA is like, we're going to be the best personalities that you can find. And they weren't concerned with what's their I'm trying to think of my terminology here, but, you know, are these 5-star matches? No, maybe not. That's not what we're focused on. Do we have the pyro? Do we have the flashing lights and everything else? No, that's not us. It's going to be personalities. We're going to gamble on that you are going to care about each and every person that's on our roster, and you're going to want to see them fight to win. And we're going to take Nick Aldis, and he's going to make that championship belt the most important thing in the entire world, and you're going to want to see people try to get it from him. And it works for me. That's what affects me. I love that kind of presentation.
Agree. Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah, me too. Yep, me too. I you know, like you guys, and for me, I was pretty young, but I can remember the Saturday morning studio shows, and you know, seeing those, and you know, even the things that the NWA does with the commercials on the shows. I love that. I mean, because that is the kind of stuff that you saw in the late 70s and early 80s on these studio shows. Give me 1 second.
He agrees. Or she.
But yeah, the studio shows back then were where it was at. And I just remember, those commercials they show, while people think they're silly, sometimes they laugh and stuff like that. But you know what? They were actually realistic. That's how the commercials were back in that time. So, I mean, even a small detail like that, see, to me, that kind of shows you that you're trying to get fans. That kind of shows you that you're looking for a particular market because, again, kids, younger kids that have watched nothing really but WWE up to this point. And I'm talking not even maybe back to the Nitro versus WWE time, but kids, younger than that. There's no way they'd know what that meant. There's no way they can remember what that was or what those things are or what they're supposed to be parodying and stuff. But I love it. And the way it's presented with the fans in the building, and I got to ask you about that too. Okay. The fans that are in that building it's tremendous. I mean, just that, you've got that block of fans. They're so interactive with everything. You can hear them chanting and saying things, very clearly to the wrestlers and stuff when all this comes up and, he's interacting with the fans. You've been there. So tell us, what's that like? That's gotta be awesome.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like if it's something you ever get a chance to do, it is if I give it one con at all out of pros and cons, it's that it is a stretch because, they're filming a lot in one day. So, you're probably going to be there for 4 hours at least. And there's not drinks. There's not food. There's nothing like that. So you're in the studio. You can't have anything in the studio. And, but besides that point that, that I've lost my voice literally every night I've been there. It is the most interactive crowd and everybody just has, I mean, we weren't all like planning it ahead of time, but like, it seems like there's this unspoken understanding that we want this to succeed just as much as the wrestlers and David Lagana and Billy Corgan do. Like, we want this thing to work. And credit where it's due, back when I first started going there in the first set of tapings when Jim Cornette was there, he actually made a really good point one time. Like, he walked out at the beginning and said, if you were watching Jimmy Kimmel one night and he would tell his jokes in his monologue and nobody laughs, it's not that funny for the folks at home. He's like, part of it is that the crowd is laughing. He's like, so we need you to be interactive. We want you to be loud. If something sucks, say it sucks. If you love something, make sure people know that you love it. And that was something he really contributed that first time around. That he had, I guess, just because maybe even he had that experience, but people took that and ran with it, man. And I'm one of them. Nick Aldis has told me to shut up, fat boy. And it's one of those things. Like you don't want to be disrespectful, but at the same time, they want you to like make something happen there, and it's worked apparently because, folks like the question mark. And again, I wasn't even on board with this, but the question mark gimmick was over the second he walked out. Like, people went freaking nuts for the question mark. And I was just sitting there like, what the hell is happening here? But people loved him. And apparently that changed the whole plan, like everything that happened with him. And now he's a regularly occurring character. So no, that crowd, man, I consider that the closest thing you're going to find to that kind of crowd was probably what it must have been like to go see ECW, at the bingo hall or whatever. Like it just, as into it as that crowd was, I think that's how this crowd is, except a little, not as violent.
A little more reserved, yeah.
Right.
I went to one ECW show, and they'd have them in small towns up near this area, obviously, because of being in Philadelphia was the main area that they would have all their matches. So every now and then they would come up, closer to my area. And I can remember being at a show, and you want to talk, like, I mean, the fans would be outside of those or outside of wherever they were having them, and they'd be pulling stop signs off of the metal, signpost outside, bringing the stop signs in to give to the athletes for them to hit other people with them. So yeah, man, they were crazy to see. I remember actually the one I was at, Jericho was there. So that was pretty amazing. And, Jericho is cursing and screaming at the one guy that he was in the group that we came with and telling him he's going to take his girlfriend away from him and all that kind of stuff. Oh man, it was insane. But yeah, I agree with you there. I think that's a very good analogy. I think it's
that side of it that you're talking about that makes me, it's always so weird to say to people, because as far as the wrestling goes, NWA is one of the most reserved. Like, I mean, it pretty much on those shows stays in the ring until you get to a pay-per-view maybe or something. But it's kind of in the ring, and it's straightforward and all of that. There's not like a bunch of people throwing chairs at each other or anything like that. But also at the same time, growing up and, experiencing the Attitude Era, ECW is like always my go-to, like closest comparison, just for how it feels. Not the violent side of it, like I said, but just the scrappy underdog competitor that's out there just doing stuff that makes people care about what they're doing, and just hoping to make their way up, and you're rooting for them. Like, you want them to succeed so that they're one of the big players,
Yeah, I agree. I think ECW gets a bad rap. And it's funny because even Daze actually started streaming them a little bit. He had some polls and some people voted to watch it. And I know even he said after it was over that it's, it was different than what he expected it to be, because so many people just thought it was all blood and gore. And it really wasn't, I mean, yeah, did it have that? Yes. Did it have a lot of crazy violence? Yes, but it wasn't all about that. And I think people just kind of give it a little bit of a bad rap. So yeah, no, I agree with you. And I enjoyed it. I remember, I'm always up late. So I can remember staying up on a Saturday night at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning and watching it. Cause that's when they would have it on. And yeah, I agree. I agree with you.
And a lot of people don't give them enough credit for this, but they changed the trajectory of Stone Cold's career just by that brief stint that he had in ECW. He only wrestled one match, but the promos that he cut and all of those things that kind of helped him get away from that gimmick of stunning Steve Austin from WCW.
No, you're 100% right. And that's actually what I was thinking about too, is that, I preface it the way I did because the common understanding I think for ECW is the violence, but no, you got Stone Cold, you got guys like Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit and those kind of guys that came through there. You mentioned Jericho, and I think Eddie was even there at one point. And,
yep.
And it was like the cruiserweights technically came from ECW. That was a thing WCW stole from them. And so
right.
It was, ECW was a lot more than that. So the wrestling side of it, the ECW had some of the best wrestling there was. So me saying all that is not knocking ECW, believe me. I loved ECW.
Oh, yeah. So you have interviewed a lot of people, and I know Jeff and I were a fan of your show. We watched a lot of them. So, and I'll be honest, they've been great with us. I mean, we had the pleasure of interviewing Thunder Rosa. We talked to Zicky Dice recently. Who's some of your favorite athletes in NWA, and the ones that some of the ones that you talked to? Who are some of your favorites from there right now?
Oh, that feels like a dirty question. I know. I appreciate you guys having listened. That really does mean a lot, because I mean, I think I'm just like you guys. Like we've always loved wrestling and just never thought about. I can't speak for you guys, but for me, I just never thought about doing anything with it until this whole thing started. And again, sometimes I'm late to the table, like with coming up with ideas. So my first and foremost, I have to give props to is Nick Aldis. Because I met Nick at Crockett Cup 2019 and gave him a sticker for the podcast that I had just started up. And he saw it there. He later that night at the end of the show, he said, "This is the NWA," like after his match. And when I talked to him, he was like, "So you got the show? Like, that was cool. Like, you named it after what I said that night." And I was like, "Dude, I gave you a sticker for that, like, before you said it." He's like, "Oh, well, okay, maybe I stole it from you. I don't know." But it was cool of him to acknowledge that. But he was the first guy too that when Powerr started up, he hit me up and was like, "Hey man, do you want to do an interview?" And I'm like, "Wow, I don't think that I have thought about doing this before." And I always thought, like in the back of my mind, like that would be a cool thing to do. Like, what if one day I get to talk to wrestlers? And he actually hit me up and was like, "If I'm going to be doing all these, I could at least do yours because you've been covering us anyway, and it just makes the most sense for me to talk to you." And God, I think that interview with him goes like 2 hours or something. Like, we end up in there, and he was the one that was just like, "You're pretty good at this. Like, you should just keep doing it." And it kind of like, it just was that one moment that like boosted my confidence to the top of the world, for like, okay, I'm going to reach out for somebody else. So Nick Aldis is always going to be my number one. I'll have to give him that. But surprisingly, I mean, literally everybody I've talked to from the NWA so far has been awesome. They've all been really cool people to talk to. Thunder Rosa was the first one to do a video interview with me, and she was a lot of fun. But if I had to pick like surprisingly really fun interviews, I'd throw in Zicky Dice, but I think that he's not surprising. He just seems like he's a fun guy. Mm-hmm. But Marty Bell is one of them, and May Valentine. I think both of them are just two of the coolest people on the planet, like just in general, without NWA. I think that they are just really good, cool people to talk to. Like Marty Bell, that conversation I had with her was one of the most fun times I've had, just like talking to somebody and just like her story. And like the same with May Valentine, she's a pretty face on NWA, and she's Royce Isaac's girlfriend, but you would never know that at 17 she was a best-selling author. She's from Brazil. Wow. Like she became a journalist, covered like the West Memphis 3, and like has hosted like rock award shows, and like she's done like literally everything, like hunted ghosts and like all of this stuff. Wow, like May awesome. Valentine is just a fantastic human being to talk to. Like it's just a weird thing. So yeah, I guess if I have to choose, I'll go with the underdogs the same, Marty Bell and May Valentine.
That's awesome, man. I'm very similar to Jeff and I mean, it's a very humbling experience. It really is, to get a chance to speak to, some of these athletes. And I know Jeff and I were, after we were done speaking with Thunder Rosa, it was such an amazing interview to hear her give, her backstory and kind of telling us how, where she came from and how she was kind of, helping set up the rings and all that kind of stuff. And then we actually heard the same thing from Zicky as well when he talked to us. And it's like, wow, it's really cool to kind of hear that stuff. And then Jeff and I have spoken to some indie wrestlers and stuff too. So it's really cool to get that perspective from them. And like you were saying, to realize where they came from and what other things they were doing. And it's really fascinating stuff. Like, and again, I never thought at this point a month ago that I'd be talking to wrestlers. It's a pretty humbling thing. And talking to some people like we did with Nikita Koloff, that was amazing. I never in my life would have thought I would be speaking to somebody like that. So yeah, it's really cool. And I have to give a tip of the hat again to the NWA because of how, open their athletes are, not only to doing, shows like this and podcasts, but also just in general on social media. They're very quick to throw a like to somebody if they mention them in a post. A lot of them will follow you if they mention, if you mention them a few times or things like that. And I think that's pretty awesome. I mean, you don't see that with larger companies very much. And look, I get it. They're bound to certain contract rules and things like that as well. But, that's for the people who are listening and you don't watch NWA, this is something that they will do is they will interact with their fans, which again, I applaud them for that because you don't see it very much.
They literally care about who is watching. And that is something that is rare. It's certainly something you don't get from WWE, and I'm not knocking anybody for loving WWE. I'm really not, and I'm just saying, like, NWA is that scrappy underdog, and they legitimately are scratching and clawing for every fan. They want you to love them, and they will hear your feedback. They care what you think about their product, and it's so impressive. And hey man, I mean, I don't think it's a knock to say this about some people, but like their talent is also in some ways, like I feel like Lagana or somebody even said this, that like sometimes it's the island of misfit toys. Like it's like these people that are, I did an interview with Sal Renaro and I feel bad for even leaving him out now. Like that guy is just a dude who's been doing this since the 90s. And he even says in that interview that he kind of looks at this as like, he doesn't want to say it's his last chance, but maybe this is his last chance, like to become a name. And so there's guys like that. There's people like Thunder Rosa, who is not, and again, no disrespect, not the youngest person, but she, like you mentioned her and Zicky Dicey. You talked to them. One of the biggest takeaways I had from them is that they're super inspiring because you're like, these people are going to be something. Like there's nothing that will stop them from succeeding at this. Like they just will. And so like Thunder Rosa is a perfect example of that. She's a person who has now got it together. And if it's in MMA or wrestling or whatever, I mean, the NWA is lucky to have her because she is a star. Like she just is, but she never has had the chance to show it until right now. And she's just blowing it out of the water. So I guess like everybody involved with that promotion is trying their hardest, and they are interactive on social media. They care about your opinion. They want you to like what you see, and they'll listen to your feedback. It's really amazing. Like that's not a place you can get to with most wrestling companies right now.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. What did you think about the Camille thing, man?
Oh, dude, I was shocked, honestly. Like I was there in the crowd for that match. And so I just walked into that episode just like, well, it's the swerve. And I was kind of honestly, like I was thinking in my head, I was like, this is a little BS. Like they're really pushing this her talking thing, and she's not going to talk. Like, because I remembered her winning the match, and that was cool and all. But Joe Galley tries to get her to talk, and she just leaves. So I'm like, that sucks. They're going to swerve. Hope it works. And then when her voice kicked in at the end, I was like, holy crap. Like she's really talking. That's her. That's and I thought she nailed it, man. I thought she sounded authentic, legit, like everything you'd want out of her. Like she came to end all of you like that. Wow. All right. Well, don't screw with this chick. Like that's it's there's a part of me that's always going to miss silent Camille, just dangerous and doesn't speak and all that. But this is the way it has to happen. It looks like she has the ability to talk, and she's going to use it. So I'm for it. She's evolving.
Yeah, man, that wow, we loved it. I know Jeff, we were talking about it. I know he loved it as well. It just, it seemed just the whole promo that was cut just seemed really amazing how they did it. The backstory, was kind of like where she came from and everything like that. And then just the end of that, I'm telling you, you couldn't really have been more intimidating at the end of that video than she was. And if we're going to get her and Thunder Rosa, boy, oh boy, that could be something amazing to see. And I cannot wait for this whole thing outside to go away already and get back to some wrestling and stuff like that. So where do you see, we asked this of some of our guests too about other promotions and stuff like that, but where do you see the NWA going? Do you think it's going to end up having a TV show at some point? Do you think they're going to go that direction? Do you think they're just going to kind of stay the course and do what they're doing? Obviously, we're predicting now, and who knows when this whole virus thing ends. So, but where do you see them going? Do you see it becoming TV? Do you see it becoming, they're going to get out of the studio and go into a live arena more? Where do you think the company's headed?
Well, before I get there, Jeff, I know why you fell in love with Camille. It was that Carolina accent was real thick.
That was one of the reasons.
He did say that, yes.
I did say that.
I think she said something like hail or something like that, or I forget what it was, and I was like, oh, there she is. There's the Carolina girl. But no, man, I think that, so here's the thing. I'm not a crazy person. I don't think that the NWA survives forever just being on YouTube. I think that in some form or fashion, I think Lagana's even said this, that there will always be something on YouTube. But I think that their goal is I look at NWA Powerr in its form right now as a pitch to a network somewhere that someday is going to be looking for programming. This whole thing that's happening in the world now is, I think, going to hinder that a little bit for at least for a while. I don't know, who knows how long, but I think where they were going next is I think they were looking for live shows. I think they were, I saw some hints of it, that they were considering like, well, what if we can tour this thing a little bit? And so I feel like that was the next phase in their plan. From talking to them, they've said from day one they had a 20-year plan for what they're going to do. And I think things went faster than they even expected. So I talked to Lagana one day in the studio about it, and I said, so like, where are we at in the 20-year plan? We're like 2.5 years, something like that, Ed. Like, where would you say you're at as far as the 20-year plan? And he was like, actually, it feels like we're already in 5 or 6. So I think that they're okay. Like, I'm not worried about them going away right now. I think that Billy's a smart guy, and he has planned to do what he's able to do. And so I think they're sustainable for a little while. But, yeah, I think that they're obviously hoping at some point that they get picked up by a network somewhere, that something happens on television.
Yeah, I
think they can.
Yeah.
You don't.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you'd almost think that, like, when networks are always looking for like live productions, since WWE and AEW are still able to like push out content right now in the middle of all this crap, you'd think that somebody might be like, hey, can you guys get together in Nashville or something and like throw something together for us? Like, give us a weekly show or something, at least fill some time. But, who knows? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, the only thing I wonder is, and I guess you always think this way, when you like something, you don't want to see it change much. And I wonder if they do go to TV, which again, look, I want the best for the company. I love it. And I want to see them succeed. And whatever that means, whether it means they've got to get into a live thing, or they've got to, be on a network or start, that kind of thing. I just wonder, getting away from where they were with the studio tapings and stuff like that, I wonder if that's going to be, I don't know what the right word is. I wonder if I'm not saying it's going to be bad for them, because obviously, change is always usually good, but I wonder if getting away from what they're doing really well right now is going to affect them adversely at all.
Well, I think that they know that. So I'm trying to think of the way to word this with only saying things that have been publicly said and not speaking too much out of school. But first off, I think Legata has even said this part, that like TNT approached them a while back. Like that they talked to TNT and they pitched them the show that they're doing right now. They pitched them NWA Powerr, but AEW came along and they liked, that they went that route instead. And so they weren't sure about studio wrestling. So hopefully success on YouTube will equal people seeing like there's a market for this somewhere. Mm-hmm. I will say that that I've heard through the grapevine, like things where ideas were tossed about. And I'll just put it this way, that if they were going to go somewhere like a network, that part of the deal is that sometimes a network will think that they are buying your company. And Billy Corgan has no desire to do that. And so I think that he's pretty firm in owning what he's got and doing it through his vision and not giving in on that part of it. Whereas if they've been offered something that would give them a platform, but it involved handing over control somewhere else, that's been the roadblock, that they're like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're trying to do our show, and we just need a place to put it to help bring you viewers. But if you're just trying to take over, that's not the thing that's happening. If that makes sense. Hopefully I said that vaguely and not vaguely enough at the same time.
No, absolutely. Absolutely, man. No, perfect. Makes perfect sense. Yeah, very cool. Jeff, do you have anything else for Gary at all?
Yeah, I actually do. I have one last question for you, sir.
I'm ready.
So, what advice would you
I'm
give
married,
someone?
Jeff. Sorry.
What advice would you give someone who's interested in getting involved in wrestling and doing what you did, and stepping beyond that fear of, like, is this something that I really want to do? How would you motivate someone to get started if this is something that they're passionate about?
Man, I would say if you'd asked me a year ago, or if you told me a year ago I'd be answering a question like that from anybody, I would be like, you're crazy. It's you have to just do it. Like that's legit it. It's you. Me a year and a half, 2 years ago would be, this almost sounds arrogant. I don't mean it arrogant, but like if you'd have told me a year and a half ago that I'd be having talked to the people that I've talked to and doing the things that I'm doing right now, I'd have been blown away. Like it just, and not that I'm like, we're not talking about me being Ric Flair and making millions of dollars and riding in limousines or anything, but it's just like actually feeling some progress and doing some things and talking to people like you guys, even like just like you guys and the wrestlers, and just like that there's this community out there you can be a part of if you just put yourself out there and you just start talking you know, and just start expressing how you feel about something. I spent so much time not doing it because I could tell myself all day long, I hate the way my voice sounds, or I don't like the way I look on camera, or whatever excuse you could possibly make for yourself to not do something. Listen, your mind can do it, man. If you let it, it will come up with the most bullshit, asinine reason that you should not do something. But you do it anyway if you love it, because you got to do what makes you happy. And if wrestling makes you happy and all you want to do is talk about wrestling, then you better just start talking about wrestling. And you better just throw it out there, put it on the internet. I guarantee you that there is somebody that also wants to talk about wrestling and wants to hear other people talk about wrestling. You guys are doing it right now. I'm doing it. I mean, we know a whole community of people that are doing exactly the same thing. And I like to think that, I mean, God, you know, Wrestling Daze. I mean, look at that guy. What is that guy doing? Like, I mean, this is just what he does now. And that's pretty impressive. Like, it's out there for you to do. And maybe it never makes you millions of dollars, but how good do you feel knowing that you've got a show that people listen to and people want to talk to you? Like, that's a cool feeling. And like, and if nothing else, just the people that you meet along the way it's worth it. Like, just the experiences. So, I mean, there's not any better advice, I don't think, than to, anything that's telling you not to do it, just don't listen to that. You just have to. It's just the thing that you have to do.
Wow, man.
That's
Love
awesome.
it. Yeah. Love it, man. That's such great advice. And again, I can speak to it because, I mean, you know, there's Jeff and myself basically, you know, met in the Daze community, you know, started on each other's podcast. I started one that I still do to this day. So did Jeff. And then, you know, Jeff had me on, we met that way. And then, you know, who knew? It's like all of a sudden, you know, hey, we both like wrestling, so why don't we talk about wrestling? And it's great because, you know, what you just said echoes some of the people who we've talked to, because we asked them this question a lot. And, you know, like Gary Cassidy, who is a wrestling journalist that we speak to a bunch, and, you know, he came out and just said, you know, what advice do you have, you know, if you want to start in this business? And he just said, listen, you just have to, you know, don't be afraid. Like you said, don't be afraid to try it. You know, email these wrestlers, email these people, because yeah, maybe you'll get 50 people who won't answer you, but you might get 5 or 6 that do. And then there you go, you're off and running. And yeah, I could never, ever have expected to talk to the people who we've talked to in the last month. Never in a million years. So
every single one of those you get just leads to the next one too. So like it's that Nick Aldis doing This Is the NWA led to every other interview I've ever gotten. The fact that I can throw down Nick Aldis's name, especially now, it's like Nick Aldis does this. Nick Aldis shows up and Nick Aldis interacts with you know, the YouTube show or the podcast or the social media feed. Like, that's all you need sometimes, is that one guy who believed in you and who stuck with you. And I mean, it's you already, I don't know another way to put this and say this. I don't know how vulgar you guys get, but there were a lot of sperm at the time that you were made. And you already won the lottery, dude. You outswam all the other ones. The miracle was the fact that you even exist as a person. Now you're here. So it's like what you do with the rest of your time. That's the important part. It's taken me God knows how many years to figure this out, but it's like, are you just going to sit around and think about the stuff you wish you did with that time? Or are you actually going to start doing something with it? Every interview you'll hear me have, go back to the archives. Any single one I've done, it's why it's like kind of flattering you guys even brought it up now, is because I've always said, like to Mae Valentine, the last one I did, like, I gotta know, like, what made Mae Valentine at 17 be like, F it, I'll write a book? Like, what did that? What made it happen? You know, like what made Nick Aldis stick through all the times that people have just crapped on him and said he wasn't good enough, or that he wouldn't be, you know, he's not the Seth Rollins in the ring or something. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, what keeps Nick Aldis going? What makes any of those guys do what they do? And I'm always intrigued by that. But half the time, like you just said, it's that something was in their head and they were like, this is what I do, and I'm going to do this. And that was just it. And they just kept doing it. It was never about money. It was never about fame. It was just, they said, I'm here. I have the ability. All I have to do is just put it out there. And then the rest of it hopefully falls.
Love it. Absolutely love it, man. That's absolutely love it. Wow. Yeah, you're so right. I mean, you hear this stuff, and I know I'm being an old timer. You know, I heard this all throughout my life, and you know, you don't ever get anything you don't try to get, and you know, yeah, I mean, it holds true. Even today, and look. You know, I'm jealous that you talked to LaGreca, man. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. Jeff and I were talking about that. We're like, because we saw him put it out there that he was that he was looking for a podcast to go on to. I'm like, so I threw our name in the hat. I just stuck our, you know, I put it out there, and I'm like, oh man, how cool would that be if LaGreca came on the show?
Do you know what did it though? It was Aldis. It was Aldis again.
That's awesome.
Aldis. Tweet it out if you go back in the timeline. Like when I said something about it, Aldis said, I think the two of you talking would be a brilliant thing. Like you guys should have a conversation, and you've both been supportive since day one. And like immediately after he sent that tweet, I got a message from LaGreca saying, like, let's set something up. And so it took that one person that believed, you know. You guys have it too. I mean, Daze is pretty prominent, man. And
yeah.
It just takes that. Once people get to know you, like, I don't know, man. I go to the Powerr tapings, and Zicky Dice is like one of my best buddies now. You know, like he's a cool guy, and he's just a dude. Like a normal guy that is just a really good guy. And I fully believe that guy, assuming that NWA doesn't take off into the stratosphere, like Zicky Dice will end up somewhere that does. Like I really feel like he will. So, and you guys have already got him. So you're already in the door. He knows who you are. So
yeah. Zicky was a great interview. We had a lot of fun. He just seems like a really down to earth guy. We love that interview. Absolutely.
Yeah, man, that's it. It just takes that little bit, and the LaGreca interview is coming soon. I've actually taken some time off, like just a week off. I was super busy and personal at work, but the YouTube channel is coming back this week. Nice. Tried to launch it strong for This Is the NWA. As you know, like, I mean, I don't know if this is like a weird thing to say, but like Rotella and I are doing our own separate things kind of now, and so I've got the This Is the NWA YouTube, because there's the 10 Pounds of Gold YouTube. Or 10 Pounds of Podcast YouTube. But anyway, long story short, I'm bringing it back with that LaGreca interview, because he also did video with me and wanted to sit down and talk that way. And so I think it's a good interview. And a lot of this stuff we're talking about, I get to talk to him about. And so I think it's going to be fun. So people can look forward to that here in the next week or so.
That's awesome. I was just gonna ask you, before we let you go, tell everybody out there. So you just mentioned the LaGreca interviews coming back on your YouTube. Where can everyone find you if they're looking for you? Obviously, this is the NWA Pod, but where else can they find you if they want to get in touch with you or reach out to you?
Yeah, it's the podcast itself is at the NWA Pod everywhere, and the personal is at This Is Gary Horne. It's Horne. There's lots of jokes to make. My dad had one. He would always say the E is silent until midnight, ladies. That was like his standard joke. And here I am right now on national National Podcast Network. I'm saying it. So thanks, Dad. But anyway, no, this is Gary Horne at the NWA Pod. On any of those social medias, you can click there and find a link to everything else, the YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all of that stuff. So, guys, this has been cool to me. I've loved talking to you guys. You guys are awesome.
Oh, listen, man, we really appreciate you joining us. Again, for us just starting out, the fact that we get to talk to you, we get to talk to Adam, others that we've had on the show, all the superstars and everything like that. It's just an honor for us because, we went from a point where we were watching and loving the content that you guys were doing and still do. And it's just, it's crazy. It's an honor for us to have you on as well, man. I thank you so much for being a part and for joining us today, man. Come back anytime. We would love to talk to you about anything that comes up down the road.
One of the biggest achievements that we ever got together was working our way into the Wrestling Daze community, and then you guys started up, and this is the best community, honestly. Like, it is such a cool group of people, and so I still talk to lots of people in there. I'm in like the chat and stuff too. Like, yeah, everybody in the Daze community is awesome. So this is, like I said, an honor for me as well.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And man, good luck with everything. And I'll be tuning in for that LaGreca interview for sure. Really would love to hear that. I loved him on Sirius Radio when I used to have Busted Open Radio and listen to that all the time. So I'll definitely be tuning in for that. And you guys, if you love NWA, please check it out. Look for Gary online. He is involved in our community quite a bit, so check him out as well. Check out that YouTube page. And, man, thank you so much for being here, buddy.
Yes, thank you, guys. Thank you so much. It was really cool to talk to you, Jeff and Joe.
Yeah, same here, bud.
Thanks,
same here.
Man. Same here.
Take it easy, man, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Yes, sir. Anytime. I am easy to find.
There you go, man. Thanks. Have a good one, buddy.
You too.